All right. So let's kick things off here. Thanks, everybody. We're going to keep this very informal. It's always fun to try to figure out, should I be talking to the mass of people in front of me or everyone at home? So we'll kick things off here. We're going to keep it very informal and just kind of start things off with a little bit about the event that Marty's got planned. And then we'll throw some questions at you just to try to get you thinking about some of the topics that we're going to be discussing. And then as we go through, if any questions pop up, we have a great panel with us here. So just to kind of start things off, thank you to our panelists, or as I've nicknamed them after Marty's challenge, the pin in the canal. That's going to get annoying, so I'm just going to here. Our panelists. You like that? You like that? Oh, yeah, okay, I can change that here. Our panelists joining us today, we have Alexander Coates, is a PhD candidate, and Jamie Burr are joining us from way up north, but not that far up north, from the wonderful land of Canada. And they're bringing with them a wealth of wisdom and expertise in endurance exercise physiology. So we're really happy to have them joining us. Jessica Gary is a professor in the Department of Nutrition right here in Fall College, and our resident expert on sports nutrition. So anything and everything nutrition related today for our questions from our friends at home and the whopping thousands of people in this room. This looks so depressing, by the way, like just looking at the camera angle here. So all of our sports nutrition questions, Dr. Gary, thank you for joining us. Dr. Jeff Pauline is also joining us from Falk in the Department of Sport Management. And Dr. Pauline is our resident expert on sport and exercise psychology. So we're trying to take a somewhat holistic approach to this in Marty's quest as he starts to ramp things up for his training. So without further ado, I'll pass things over to Marty to say hi to everybody. He's the one hanging out on the table there. Hopefully you can see him.
I'm trying to be as informal as possible. Is this microphone working for you guys at home? I get a thumbs up from somebody. Right. See that. So, yes, I am Marty Pasternak. Hi, audience. Hi, audience at home. And I decided this winter to run the length of the Erie Canal in just 7 days. I'm doing this to support my cousin Kevin. Excuse me. Kevin, at the age of 28 years old, was diagnosed with colorectal cancer right after he found out that his newlywed wife was pregnant with their first child. And it was devastating, to say the least, but Kevin is one of the strongest individuals I know. He turned this horrible news into something great that he's used since to really become an advocate for those with colorectal cancer, screening, getting tested. And for years, he did all sorts of different fundraisers while fighting this, while going through chemo, numerous surgeries. And one of his biggest events every year was the Buffalo Onion Run, which I always thought was a lot of fun because people got to run around Delaware Park in Buffalo, New York, and I always wanted to do this, but I was not what anybody would consider a picture of health. I was a 2-pack-a-day smoker. I ate horribly. I had just, a couple of years before this, given up a pretty abusive drinking habit that I had. And needless to say, I was like 60 pounds overweight. I moved out here about 7 years ago and decided to quit the smoking, quit all the fast food, kind of changed my life. Very new location, new life, all that fun stuff. And in 2019, I decided to participate in the Buffalo Onion Run for the first time. It was also my first actual 5K run. And for those that don't know, that's 3.1 miles. That is like, I don't know, 100th of what I'm planning on doing this summer. And it sucked, to say the least. I never liked running. I kind of always liked weightlifting more. My experience was more in obstacle course racing because people couldn't tell how slow I was, or at least how slow I perceived myself to be, because it was up and down mountains or over obstacles. And it was common for people to not move very fast. So I had done like 2 or 3 of those prior to this. And I remember running through Delaware Park, and I was pushing myself a lot faster than I really had ever done before. And on the way back, the loop cut on the inside, and you can see all the people that were behind you coming on the outside. And I remember I was hurting, I was in a lot of pain, and saw Kevin and his wife. I think they were at 2 kids at that point. They have 3 now, beautiful children. But I think they only had Ben and Abby at the time. But I saw them walking the course, and I remember having the thought that I didn't know pain, so I really shouldn't be late. And I didn't stop. I pushed myself harder, and when I crossed the finish line, I was really shocked to find out that I placed, it was either 6th or 7th overall, first in my age group, and I was absolutely floored that I could run, if that makes any sense. And since then, I've continued to kind of push my self-imposed boundaries and done more and more runs and obstacle courses, things like that. And this summer, I was trying to think of something because of COVID. I couldn't lift weights anymore. I've done a couple of virtual challenges where I ran distance in New York State and a couple other ones. I found out a friend of mine who is Charlie Engel. I had no idea that Charlie, I've known him for about 2 years now through Spartan, an obstacle course race that I like. And he has a book, and apparently ran across the Sahara Desert in 111 days straight. And I had no idea about this for 2 years. So we watched a documentary, my girlfriend and I watched a documentary on Charlie and running the Sahara. And I'm like, you know, I can do that with your Canal. I called Charlie. He was all on board to help coach me kind of. And I reached out to my cousin and said, hey, Kev, I want to do a big fundraiser for you this year. Because about a month and a half prior to that, Kevin had a little party at the house. And he told me that he wasn't going to see 36, which this year is going to be his 36th birthday. So I really wanted to do something big for him. I've done a couple of other fundraisers, little ones over the past couple of years for him. And so I reached out to him, asked him if he wanted me to do another fundraiser, and I was planning to do something really big and potentially stupid. And asked him, you know, if he wanted that and for who. And he goes, well, my nonprofit could use a little bit of money. And he told me about the Buffalo Pulling Board, which he's trying to create this statewide coalition to change legislation, make testing more accessible, break some of the various stereotypes of colorectal cancer screening, because well, nobody likes talking about their butt, apparently. And when he said a statewide coalition, I kind of laughed, and I was like, hey, well, I'm kind of planning on running across the state. And that is how the Untitled Chapter was born. I still have no experience technically with ultra running endurance, and that is not going to stop me. I had my first 35-mile run actually planned for this weekend, which I decided on about 3 hours ago. So this is the kind of individual I am. So I am very appreciative for all of the specialists here and people that know a lot more than I do, because hopefully I'll learn something tonight too. So that's my brief little intro. Sorry to talk a lot. Yeah.
All right, and Tom, I'm going to put you on the spot. You're now an honorary panelist. So also joining us, Dr. Tom Ritzard, faculty member in the Department of Exercise Science, avid cyclist, and now an honorary panelist. Thanks, Tom.
Thanks, Steve. I'm here because I watched everything on Netflix. So, like you said,
You got the message I sent out. Appreciate that. Yeah, one of the messages I sent out is, you have nothing else to do tonight. You've already watched everything on Netflix. Come hang out. All right, folks. So our goal here today is to try to help Marty just maybe think about some things, and looking at a lot of the students and the names that we have, you know, all the students joining us. We have a lot of student athletes out there. a lot of students that are avid exercise enthusiasts and also bring a lot of experience to this discussion. So I'm going to start by throwing a question at you to our friends at home here. And Marty, if you don't mind sharing a little bit, you shared with us your plan for what you see the 7 days being like. So can you just talk a little bit about what you think those 7 days are going to look like? You know, and the question that our folks at home are answering here is, what do they think your biggest challenge is going to be? So how are you planning on tackling the 7 days?
So, obviously, taking as, not as slow as possible, I'm not gonna walk the entire thing, but we're gonna be chunking it up. I have a crew that we're currently working on the logistics for, where we're gonna try and break it up to about 8 to 10 minute, or 8 to 10 mile checkpoints throughout the run. I am a diehard masochist, so we are doing everything backwards. We're starting in Alton and running uphill to Buffalo in August. So every 8 to 10 miles, I'm gonna have refuel check basically. Get some hydration, food, things like that, change sneakers, socks, whatever's needed. The general idea is to run roughly a marathon in the morning and then take a brief lunch break, a little bit of massage therapy, change of clothes, and then run another marathon in the afternoon. The numbers fluctuate. My lowest day is actually 42 miles. That is the day that I go from Chittenango to Fort Byron. So I run right through Syracuse, which is the heart of all the hills. My longest day is going to be 57 miles, which, if memory serves me correct, is day 5. And I forgot the numbers with me. But it fluctuates between 42 and 57 miles per day. So it's going to be a lot of fun.
All right, so with that as the backdrop, just to share the results here, you're all pretty pretty divided here. So we have 15% of you think that the training leading up to it is going to be one of the bigger challenges. Oh, 19%, thanks to whoever just voted there. 15% of you are thinking dehydration, 11% think nutrition, 26% think recovery. And winner chicken dinner is 30% for psychology. And
Well, it actually reminds me of something that Charlie told me just last week. He goes, Marty, don't worry, ultra running is 90% mental, the other 10% in your head.
Well, I think everyone at home agrees with you. And yeah, just I mean, for the hundreds of people in the room, what do we think? Who's training? Show of hands. Hydration, nutrition, recovery, psychology. So here in the room, we're split between recovery and psychology. So with that, I guess I'll throw a question out to some of our panelists here. And I figure we could start with Jamie and Alexandra. I'll flip things to you. And just to kind of share with everyone at home, we had Marty into the Human Performance Lab very recently. We put him through the ringer. We hooked him up to just about everything we own, and we did a series of tests. So we have these results to share with everyone as well that we could use as talking points. But I guess first question, in your experience, what do you think are some predictors for Marty's success? And from where you're sitting, what are some of the things that you're thinking about that might be important?
I want to know what Jamie put for his. What do you think's the biggest problem?
Well, I was actually going to put for other. I was just going to write yes, but I thought that might be a cop out. But I think that's an interesting question. Maybe just before I start, thank you very much for having us here. It's a pleasure. And for the students in the room, because you probably don't get to hear it from other professors around the world very often, you're very lucky to work with Dr. Heffernan, somebody I've looked up to for a long time, which may sound weird because he has a full head of hair and I don't. But cool place that you're in. So yeah, I'll start us off there by just saying I think all of those things matter, but I think what's going to matter at a given point in time depends on how far along we are. So the actual answer I put right now is training. So a bit of an echo there. But I think that's going to change because by the time you get to race day, sorry, everybody else got that echo.
Yeah. Oh, myself.
So let me see, I guess for friends at home there, don't forget to mute. And you got the, you still getting an echo?
Perfect. What I was going to say is by the time we get to rating, you're basically, we have an expression that you dance with the girl you're leaving home. So your fitness will be what it is by the time you get there. And I think psychology and other things will really matter after that.
I feel
Kevin, we
like
might still have a little bit of feedback.
Both are, one is muted, one not.
We have a multitude of computers happening over here, so there might be issues.
Try. Experiencing technical difficulties, please stand by. Ladies and gentlemen, check the door.
So hi, everyone, it's here. Maybe I should talk.
I'm gonna try something. I'm just gonna mute on our side.
okay. That works. Okay, I'm gonna talk about training real quick too. So I definitely voted for training. And that comes, I think, from two perspectives. So my first perspective would be the research side. We did do this performance predictors of ultramarathon study, and we found that in ultramarathon, in the 160-kilometer distance, which was our longest distance, there was basically nothing that predicted performance. And we looked at BMI, and we looked at like blood pressure, and we looked at running VO2 max and running economy and fitness, and we looked at heart rate variability. We looked at all these kind of predictors of performance. And for 160K, which was, the longest distance, there's basically nothing that predicted performance. But what we did find was that those athletes who dropped out had done less weekly kilometers beforehand. So I think having that preparation is super, super key. And then from my experience as a triathlon coach, so I coach all distances of triathlon. And I find with the Ironman distance, which would be the closest we can come to ultramarathon, it really comes down to whether or not the athlete is ready for the event. And so then I think a lot of that comes down to, are you like muscularly, kind of musculoskeletal issues? Is your body ready to handle that load? I think it's like great to say that it's all in your head, but if you get, an IT band syndrome injury or patellar, tendon injury, you just can't keep going. And I think that comes down to whether or not your body's ready to handle that load. So that's why I voted training.
I'll maybe just play off of that. Great answer, Alex. I tend to agree with that as well, because my opinion would be we have a bit of a pyramid here. And I think the foundation has to be training, because when you know you can do something, and I don't want to speak to Jeff's area here because he's certainly more of an expert in this, but from my own experience, I used to race ultra triathlon. When you've done a distance, it's a whole lot easier to convince yourself you can do it again. And if you're more fit, you're going to recover better. And then, of course, you do the best you can in each of those areas as well. So I will also go with training for now.
We are training biased, though. We are exercise physiology lab, not psychology or nutrition.
Let's try this again. How are we on this side now?
Much better.
Awesome. All right, how's my microphone? Any echo?
You're good.
So I think we figured it out. I'll just keep, when our friends at home want to join in here, I'll just keep moving on this side. And I think that should work. So let's see, where to next? And I'll move on here, looking at some bases. Jess, how about talking about some of your perspectives here? So where did you vote? And what might be some of your concerns and some of your advice for us there?
Yeah, thank you. So I actually voted for recovery, but I did that because to me that encompasses lots of things, including diet and sleep and stress and all sorts of other components. But from a nutrition perspective, I think there's challenges both in the training component and on the actual event days themselves. I think from a training perspective, that's going to be the time to really kind of practice and do a lot of trial and error with electrolyte drinks, figuring out what you like in terms of brands or mixing your own like concentrations of a sports drink, how those things sit on your stomach, how much volume you can handle in a certain period of time. And the same with eating. At these levels of miles, you're going to have to eat while you're running in some way, shape, or form, whether you're like literally eating while running or taking a short break. And so there's opportunity there as well to kind of test out, do you want to just stick with some of the commercial products like the gels and the goos and the energy shots and the sport jelly beans, or do you want to go the route of trying to make your own products? And I would say at the level of miles you're going to be completing during the event, it's probably going to be more reasonable to kind of make your own fairly, concentrated high calorie products. And there's lots of really good recipes out there for homemade things. But honestly, a lot of the like Tour de France cyclists do these sort of like sticky rice balls that they just wrap in foil and then they can kind of like munch on it while they're cycling. There's also a lot of homemade kind of energy bites or bars that use dates as a base, and then you can kind of add whatever other ingredients or flavors you want. So that's something else that I think will need to be addressed in training, is also figuring out how much of that can you really tolerate while you're exercising before it starts to impact you just digestively. I know you said for the event, you're planning to have kind of these stops built in every 8 or 10 miles or so, which is good, but you'll want to make sure that at those stopping points, you're drinking and eating stuff that's going to really help you with the next round and not cause cramps or any other issues. So that's really what I think the goal of training is going to be, especially when you start doing these longer runs, like you said, you're planning on doing this weekend, just trying to figure out, if you've been running and you have some preferences as far as products, that's great. But now that you're going to up your mileage, you may need to add on to that. And you may realize that you need different brands or different products than what you've been using. And then from a recovery standpoint, this is probably more of an issue when you go into the event itself, but you're never going to fully eat all the calories that you're consuming over those 7 days. And so what you're going to try to do is just recover enough with food so that you feel good the night to get back out there. And that's going to be a combination of making sure you're getting enough carb through the entire day, but also getting some really good quality protein to just assist with the muscle recovery each evening. So those are also things to kind of build into your training. But I think for the event itself, you'll have to figure out kind of where you're going to be eating your meals and what that might look like, and do some planning ahead so that you can have kind of a guaranteed source of good carbs, but also some high quality protein, especially when you're done at the end of the day, so that you're feeling ready to go for the next day. And I think those are kind of my main thoughts at the moment. We could certainly talk more specifically about your exact needs and things like, dietary supplements that might be useful, but I'll stop there. And if people have questions, we can go into it a little bit more in depth, but I'll also give time for Jeff and others to weigh in.
And I know I definitely have some questions on that because I'm a supplement junkie. So I think we'll circle back to that. And I'm just kind of curious because this is way outside my wheelhouse. So 2 marathons a day, how many calories is Marty going to be expending? And yeah, that's just something that's mind blowing to me.
Yeah, we, the estimates that I've done. Albany, or Albany, Malta, they have a lot of experience in their training, and they're going to be supplying me with a whole bunch of nutrition, so I've got to get them huge things. They're going to feed me coldness for 7 days. But we're estimating roughly around between 7,000 and 8,000 calories per day on the average side. Couple of, some days it's a little bit more, a little bit less, but somewhere in that ballpark.
Yeah, that seems like an appropriate estimate to me as well. Probably, on the 8 to 10,000 calorie a day side potentially, but yeah, it's a level that you're not going to be able to replace, and you're not going to want to, because you'll be so stuffed that you're not going to want to get up and run that much again the next day if you fully replace it.
The numbers we were going off of were based off of an estimate of 42 miles per day, which when I give them the information, they kind of had wrong numbers. So the estimate was a little bit lower, but yeah, I'm guessing, especially the 57-mile day, that's definitely going to be upwards of 10,000 or more.
Next question, Jeff, if you're still up there. So a lot of the students out here thought that the psychology piece is going to be the most important piece. And I know just looking at some of the names of students we have joining us, I think just about everyone's either had intro or taking intro, but a lot of the students haven't taken an exercise or sports psychology course yet. So if you don't mind sharing some of your thoughts, and in your role, how would you work with Marty, with an athlete, and what sorts of barriers would you see, and just anything you can share with us would be greatly appreciated.
Sure. Thanks again. As Jamie mentioned, thanks for having us. This is pretty cool. Just to do a little talk like this, I think it's really interesting. I'm going to start with one word, I guess, and I'm kind of laughing. It's not a funny word that I'm going to say. It's pain. Pain is a tremendous motivator, but it's a strong barrier. And I'm not going to try to scare you at all, but I mean, this is going to be a real world issue that's going to come. And it's great that everybody kind of thought psychology, I think, is going to be an important element to this. But as we all know, all these pieces have to come together. Training with the foundation, we've got to get to nutrition. The sleep is going to be so important, but the mental is going to kind of run through all of those things. And I'm not kind of poking fun at the pain, but you almost have to you're going to kind of have to accept it and going to be part of this. And it's like anything you do with your physical training, you're going to have to plan for your mental training too. And you're going to have to be willing to accept, I think, that pain is going to come. So just to kind of go off of that. So a couple things that I generally say regardless if we're talking about ultra marathons or if we're talking with a beach volleyball player, I'm always trying to draw people back to the controllable. Control your controllables. It's not that the uncontrollables aren't important, but you got to be able to control your controllables. So one of those things clearly with the controllables are your thoughts. So we're talking 7 days. And I'm guessing, and Kevin gave me a little insight here too, you might have some company along the way, but I can imagine there's going to be some times too where you don't probably have company. I know you'll have your team with you and those kind of things, but one of the things that's going to be really important for you is, I think, how you're going to disassociate maybe when pain comes and how you've actually kind of prepared for some of that. And we could talk more about some productive ways to actually kind of do that. But that's part of like getting over some of the negative thoughts that are going to come too. And this is common for lots of people that take on really large tasks. So obviously to think of the whole task. I forgot the exact mileage. I don't know if I wrote it down. 361.5 miles. That is intimidating. So obviously, you've done the right thing in terms of breaking it down into physical chunks, but I would encourage you to break it down into kind of mental chunks too as well. That's going to be really important of how you actually digest, the physical part, but also kind of the mental part. And that kind of builds in a couple of recommendations that I have here too as well. Thinking about like a mantra or a motto that's going to be helpful perhaps when some pain does come, that helps you kind of still connect with your task, but also kind of disassociate from the feelings that you're actually having. Another big thing too, I think that would be helpful is to think about, and I think you have a strong connection with this, is really to find your why. So I think you definitely have your why. I believe that's your cousin, right? So to make sure you actually kind of connect with your why consistently over time. I think that's going to be important too while you're actually running the race. That's part of that motivation of kind of continuing to kind of keep going and help kind of break it up into smaller kind of mental chunks. And the other thing that I'd recommend too is, I think a big part of this is it's related to the physical challenge in the training, that's part of it. But I would encourage you to run on the worst days possible. So when it's absolutely pouring down rain, you should be running. I don't wish there were snow in July on anybody, but if it was snowing, I would encourage you to run in the snow. So what I'm saying is you need to challenge yourself along the way with your training, and that's going to help you mentally to kind of overcome some of your barriers too as well. So those are just a couple initial thoughts. I can also lend a little bit to that. The research doesn't identify specific character traits that say, if you have these things, you're going to be successful in a race or a competition. We haven't been able to identify those kind of things. If it was great, we could say, if you develop these traits, you're going to be a successful ultra marathon runner. That would be awesome, but we're not quite there yet. I don't think we necessarily ever will identify those specific traits, but you can develop those certain traits inside of you. So the idea of developing confidence, and I think leads a little bit back to what Jamie said about your training becomes important here. So if you've done something, right, and you've been successful with it, I would encourage you to journal along the way to kind of mark your monumental training, because that's you're going to need to draw on day in and day out. Like, I've done this, right? I'm making up what you might actually do. You might have a couple days that you'll train and do your 20-mile runs. You got to make sure you kind of take a mental note of that, journal about it, so you can actually remind yourself of all your successes with your trainings along the way, because that's going to really help build your confidence and let you know that you can do this. So that's just a little bit of thoughts initially, and really happy to win if there's a prize for winning, right? With everybody voting psych is number one. So.
That's why I say something with that, because almost every other physical challenge I've done up until this point, and this is actually a realization I had this week, it's kind of funny, but I've always had somebody telling me I couldn't, right? So that why, or that extra little reason to push, like I've always had that. And I was complaining to a mentor of mine earlier this week. I called him up and I'm like, Joe, I don't know what to do right now. I have nothing but love and support in my life. I have nobody that doesn't believe that I can do this. And it's like the biggest thing I've ever done. But literally every single person in my life has, been encouraging, been loving, like, yeah, you'll be able to do this. It's like, wait, I have no way to prove it's wrong. So like that mental block that you're talking about, right, where I don't have that extra little edge. I realized that fortunately this week, so I had a little bit of time to work on that. But that's been a big one recently. So thank you for that.
Andrew in the back said you can't do it.
Oh,
Yeah, you don't got this, man.
all right, thank you. Thank you for that.
So just think of Andrew.
I'm gonna take a picture of you later.
Yeah. I'll be your wife. Just hold it, whatever you're feeling, just hold a picture of me. You'll be good.
And our honorary panelist, Dr. Ritzard, I'll put you on the spot here. So listening to the conversation and with your experience and your expertise, what do you think might be some of the bigger challenges, and what thoughts do you have like to share with Marty and all of our members joining us?
Sure. So it's interesting that everybody's got a different angle that one question. I'm pretty much with the psychology with Jeff. Only, because I thought about it from a sort of straightforward perspective. What are the immediate factors that might predict whether you get through an individual day? I haven't done ultra marathon type running, but I've run a couple half marathons. I even ran a marathon a long time ago. But the thing that made me want to stop were simple things like, oh, I got a blister. How am I going to push through that? Do I want to push through that? And to me, that was all mental. And my assumption is that you've pretty much got everything else dialed in. Your training, you've got feed stations along the way. If you completely bonk in between feed stations, you can get off the trail in Chittenango and get a hamburger. Right, you'll get through it. But it's really the mental stuff that seems to me like the potential limiting factor. Which is maybe Jeff can comment on this, but I've read some books on from ultra marathon. Like I read a book by a guy named Kilian Jornet, who I think is like the world's best known mountain ultra distance runner, and several others from mountain climbers and things like that. And I'm always struck by the spirituality of these people. Sometimes a loopy kind of spirituality, but it's embedded in who they are and how they view the event, and it winds up, it seems to me, like becoming an important part of what they draw on mentally to get through an event like this. So the other question, Marty, I have for you is, what's your pace? What are you intending to run at?
So that is something that I'm playing around with a little bit right now. Prior to realizing that I was going to do something like this, I was running about an 8-minute pace for half marathon and marathon distances. I know that I'm going to have to slow down, which is the opposite of what I'm used to. I've been trying to push myself. It really sounds weird saying this. I'm trying to push myself to run a 9.5, 10-minute pace. The last couple of marathons I ran were about that, at about 4:15 and a 4:25 for both of those. I did do a 4x48 challenge in a couple of weeks, or actually like a half an hour, which was 4 miles every 4 hours, 48 hours. Just to kind of see where I was at. Again, those were all about 9-minute pace for those, except for one round. So I really want to try to be in like the 10-11 range, keep my heart rate low, and I'm just fortunately not facing anybody. It's just kind of me doing it, but I'm also understanding that there are going to be plenty of times where I'm probably going to have to walk a little bit. So I've been working on getting my walking pace to be about a 15-minute pace.
Yeah, so you're looking at least 8 hours a day to do 50 miles. But probably more like 9 or 10.
That's a rough estimate. We're going an hour a day.
I mean, I was thinking through some of those issues, and with respect to Jessica's comments about nutrition, there's a term for what you're attempting, which is metabolic scope. You're trying to increase your overall energy expenditure some factor above your basal energy expenditure. And there's been studies on animal species and on human athletes and so forth about what the upper limits of that metabolic scope are. For an individual event, a one-time thing where somebody goes out and runs 100 miles, you can increase that metabolic scope more than 10-fold over basal. So if your basal metabolic rate, caloric expenditure is, let's say, 2,500 calories, something like that, then you could increase that substantially. But there's a concept called sustained metabolic scope, which I think is more directly applicable here, which is, you've got some data, good. Which is what level of energy expenditure can you sustain over a longer period of time? In this case, a week or 5 days, however you're planning, however long you're planning. And that's substantially less. That's more on the order of 3 to 4 to maybe 5-fold above your resting. And so I was just kind of trying to work out in my head, all right, so if you're running, let's say 10-minute miles and it's 8 to 10 hours of activity per day and you're burning 700-800 calories per hour, something like that, are you going to be bumping up against that theoretical limit? I didn't work it out, but it just made me think about that. There's some interesting data there, and it looks like Kevin has prepared some anyways, so maybe that's where this is headed next. But those are my thoughts.
Oh, Tom, this isn't heading anywhere. Fireside chat. Fireside chat. All right, Jamie, you want any comments to that, or?
I was maybe just going to add on that because, Tom, I think that's a really interesting idea. And I think for many of us that come from competitive sporting backgrounds, we tend to think, we tend to think about the marathon. That's what we know. And this is one of those rare cases, I would suggest, where something like fat max, if you're familiar with the idea, the amount of fat you can oxidize, actually becomes applicable, right? I mean, ketone diets and low carb, they're all the rage. And I suspect many of you, like me, spend a lot of time convincing people that's probably not the best thing for them. This may be the one exception, right? Where you are going to be just keep going, right? It's like the Finding Dory kind of thing. Just keep going. And it's going to be relatively low intensity for a long time. So when you think about that and how many carbohydrates you need to bring in, for example, you're not going to be burning that many carbs exclusively. So there may actually be value in starting to train your gut for that as well.
Yeah, and it is potentially sort of low intensity activity. I mean, I think the highest metabolic scopes have been measured in foresters, believe it or not, in the Pacific Northwest, who are extraordinarily physically active, but they're certainly not running, but they do it for 12 hours a day, day in, day out. But at the end of the day, it could be a blister that brings you down, right? So I go back to psychology.
It's only one blister I have to worry about. I'm pretty okay with that. I'm anticipating losing toes.
So one blister would bring me down, but it sounds like you're tougher, so.
And we have a question coming in here, and question for Jess, but also for the rest of the panel. Please feel free to offer some thoughts. And it's related to what we were just discussing here and what Jamie brought up. Is there a best diet or a plan that you would have for Marty in the days leading up to the event to set him up for success? And is that something that would be worth it considering how long? So I guess in the days leading up for maybe success for the first couple of days, and is that something that would even be worth it considering how long the event actually is? So thanks for the question there.
Yeah, good question. I think traditionally when we think about preparing for an endurance event like a marathon or, longer distance triathlon, the thought process is to go towards some sort of carb loading model. And there's several different protocols for what that looks like, as short as just one day of carb loading or stretching it out for several days. To the point that, Jamie and Tom were making, I think in this case, the best approach is just to make sure that overall energy needs are being met. And it's probably less of a concern to overload with carbs, just because at the pace that you'll be running, you're not necessarily, you're not in competition mode the way that you will be if you're in a marathon or in a triathlon race. So that risk of running out of glycogen and hitting the wall, I think is going to be less of an issue, because you will have a slower pace and you'll take time to break and have, food and hydration. So the carb loading is probably not as big of a concern for this compared to just making sure that you're eating adequate amounts of total calories in those days leading up to the event. Because again, it's hard to predict how you're going to feel during those days when you're running. You'll hopefully be able to eat a fair amount to balance out what you've been expending, but you may not have a huge appetite. And so whatever you can kind of go in with as far as energy stores would be beneficial, especially if you run into any problems in those couple of days of the running itself.
it's funny because, you know, I run
as well.
marathons a couple of times, so I had that carb loading mentality of training. And, but I, like I said, I've been forcing myself to run at a slower pace. So I've noticed that because of carb heavy diet that I've been trying for a while, that, well, I'm having the opposite kind of effect where I'm getting heavier and feeling more sluggish, which is something that's been kind of coming to light more so over the past 2 weeks or so. It's a nutrition thing, fill out the dietary thing that was sent me earlier last week. And I noticed that like my carbs are definitely higher, but I'm not feeling that energy like I normally would carb loading prior to a race where pushing 8 miles. Yeah, it's been definitely.
Maybe just as a quick follow-up to that, Marty, rather than taking, the eggheads advice of just something we think might work, I've seen that you guys have some pretty cool data there. You could actually look at the data Kevin collected for you and figure out what your pace is from your VO2, and you can actually pull out of that, or Kevin can help you pull out of that, like what were you burning at the time? And so you can kind of map your needs and your consumption to that.
Here, yeah, if there's any other questions, feel free to type it on in. And while we're waiting for those questions, is there anything, Marty, that you'd like to chat about specifically, or if not, I'm just going to ask about supplements because I love supplements.
No, but I kind of agree with the whole psychology and mental aspect of this being one of the most difficult. Because again, this is something that I haven't done before, right? And like that first 5K, I've never running 5K before in my life. But like the 5K was impossible, right? Until I did it. And then once I did it, 5K became regular, same with the 10K and half and full. Which also goes back to the training that we were talking about. Those are really the 2 pieces I'm focusing on. So over the course of the next 3 months, 3.5, so to speak, my idea, like this weekend is gonna be 35 miles, because the farthest I've ever gone was 30. Right, so I want to be able to break that mental barrier, but still have the training to be able to push myself to the 35 miles. Then up to 40, then up to 50, and then either 55 or 57, which is gonna be my max day. So that way, when I'm out on the canal in August, I'm not looking at, I'm about to run the farthest I've ever ran in a single day. I've done this before. I haven't done it back others, but I can at least try to break it down to that, mental segment of I've done this distance before. I can do this. I'm capable of it. So I definitely feel like I need to work through those mental blocks.
I would just add one thing there. I think there's lots of value in actually accomplishing some of those short-term milestones. But one of the things I think that would be beneficial too as well is to really focus on your successes. So the fact that you're able to even, maybe you don't get completely to those 50 miles a day for whatever reason. But the fact that you're going to start, I guess, obviously you have started pretty soon, but if you're, I think what we talked about, you have maybe like 4 months of training to kind of go into this, focus on the fact that you've improved through your training and you've had success. That's going to build confidence and necessarily not just focusing on outcome, focused on the fact that you have become more fit, the things that are actually kind of controllable because you put the effort into that, in combination with the training and nutrition and the rest and all that kind of stuff.
Building on what Jeff just said there, for my athletes, we often do kind of like a key test set leading into a race, and it'll be pretty far out. So like a good 3 to 4 weeks before the event. And it's not the race. You don't want to do an Ironman before you do an Ironman. You don't need to do 360 miles before you do it for real. But like in your case, I would suggest doing a full day, like a full 56 miles. Practice your your nutrition that you want to use the shoes you want to use, like a full simulated day, and then do half of the next day. So you have like a 1.5 day simulation. And that is your, not am I ready, but do I have my kind of nutrition, my pacing, my equipment dialed, and do I know kind of what this is going to feel like going into it? You know, you can't predict how bad things are going to get when you're in the middle of it, but you can kind of get that sense of, okay, this is going to be tough, but I've proven to myself that I can do 1.5 days of it. And so I know I can keep going for 7. That's what I would suggest.
And just a quick follow-up, because I'm curious, we chat about this in class, you mentioned shoes, and the other day when my battery died, I kind of missed the conversation that you had about that. But I know with Kipchoge and the breaking too, that, you know, there was a lot of talk about the shoes. And Tom alluded to even just getting a blister can be, in his case, completely debilitating. But can you talk a little bit about what some of those recommendations might be? And Marty, I know you've been thinking about this as well. I mean, how many shoes, you know, how many pairs of shoes going through? And, what kind of shoes? Do they really make that much of an impact? Or was
Yes.
Okay.
So real quick before you go, I've got currently, I want to say it's 5, might be 6 different pairs of running shoes, all different brands, a couple of different sizes. Because on the canal when I'm running, when I run those longer distances, I learned this, your feet swell. I did not know this, even though it makes perfect sense because I'm just sitting there feeding them continuously for hours. So with that, being able to have an extra shoe size, a half size bigger, makes it so it's a lot more comfortable and I don't blister as much. So I'm not gonna shame any shoes here, but there was one particular pair that I wore for probably about 150 miles of running in January. Yeah, every time I went over 5 miles, I got blistered, guaranteed every time. Anytime I was doing my shorter distances, anything under 5 miles, I pushed my pace, I felt comfortable, and they were great. Once it went over that 5 mile mark, I don't know what it was. Might have just been some swelling of feet or whatnot. Always got a blister. So I've tried a couple of different pairs of shoes. Right now, the game plan is to go into it with 5 fresh pairs of shoes that I have had a little bit of time to run and break in. Obviously, I don't want to wear anything brand new day off because a horrible rookie mistake I will not make. But that I have tried out as well. So I have 2 pair currently that feel great. One I have roughly about 400 miles put on with no issues, and the other one I think I got about 150 miles on right now. But they felt great, and I've been enjoying them. And I have absolutely 0 issues with my feet, which is wonderful.
Okay, well, we have a couple of questions from our friends at home here. So kind of related, but not, same but different. So one question, both questions to Marty, and one I think will be Marty, Jeff, and then Marty, rest of the panel. So one question is regarding music, as maybe a potential psychological ergogenic aid. Do you listen to music when you run? Do you plan on listening to music? Do you think it might help or hurt? So is it going to be the pitch perfect soundtrack? And what are your thoughts on music? And Jeff, what are your thoughts on music as a potential ergogenic aid in this case?
So right now, in general, I'm a hard rock heavy metal kind of guy. And just gets the blood flowing for me. Not pitch perfect. Yeah, no, not pitch perfect. Pretty much anything but. If they're not screaming, I usually do not listen to it. Even though I do love all of it, I won't lie. But I've also noticed that the playlist that I normally train to, I'm also, you know, running shorter distances and a lot faster. So all those 8, 7, you know, sub-7 kind of paces. So I've kind of had to change it up and go with some more mellow music with the occasional like type song, if you will, put in. But also, for those that don't know, I somehow am a middle school librarian by trade. I still have not figured that one out either. But I listen to a lot of audiobooks. And for whatever reason, like after I listen to a playlist for a little while, and I'm just kind of, it's drowning out in my head or whatever, I switch it up, I listen to an audiobook, and I can just get lost in whatever audiobook it is, and then run. And then I've been finding on some of my longer training runs, after I've listened to an audiobook for an hour or two, I shut that off, and I don't need anything. I just kind of enjoy the sounds, especially if I'm doing any trails I'm running. I just love being outdoors. If I'm running along the side of the thruway, not so much. That'll definitely be angry music again. But so it's a mix, and it's whatever I'm feeling at that moment. But I get sick of things not very quickly. A couple hours in, I won't want to listen to the same soundtrack, or I won't want to listen to the same audio book, or it will just get sick of the part. So.
And yeah, Jeff, what do you think about that? We see a lot of athletes with the beats on before a game, not sure. But in this case, seven days of continuous movement. How do you see music fitting in?
I'm not able to actually specifically identify. I know there is a line of research that does focus on this, but I could not speak to that specifically. But I can speak to the fact that some of the things that you were talking about to me would be really important, because it goes back to one of the things I mentioned about being control the controllables. So if you want to include music in part of your game days each and every day, I would definitely recommend it and be all for it. And I would encourage you, just like you would do your physical training, it seems like you have, the mental preparation and using music as part of that, I would definitely include that and work that in too, as part of what you do. So if you like the whole switch up thing, awesome. Practice with that, make that part of kind of what you do. Podcast, audiobooks, my preference would be for Van Halen, which kind of dates me in terms of the hard rock, but that would be me. For other people it would be different. So I would definitely, if you think that that's part of you and it's going to help you, like I use the term of kind of like finding your way. This will help you kind of find your way and find that motivational piece. Keep the mix, use it along the way when you kind of practice, and then you can transition right into kind of game day, or you're essentially for you would be game week.
Right, and just being mindful of everyone's time, let's get through with another question here, and then we can figure it out from there with how we're doing on time, and if folks need to take off, and yeah, fireside chat.
I just have some writing to do at some point.
All right, so next question here is coming from Tomas. Thanks, Tomas, and Julio, thanks for your questions as well. Tomas is asking about something that came up, so yeah, he wants the extra credit. Good question. And question for all the panelists. And Marty, do you plan on utilizing any supplements, like maybe something like caffeine? And we'll just start there with that part of the question, as that you thought about using maybe caffeine or any other supplements, and then to the panelists, what do you think about, is there any evidence base behind any of the multitude of supplements that are out there that we're going to be able to use?
So caffeine is a necessity in my life. I love my coffee, and I unfortunately drink way too much Red Bull. But for when I'm running, I actually do use Tailwind. It's a green tea mix with caffeine that I've been finding does keep me up and keep me going. I plan on drinking coffee. Actually, one of my hydration pack water bottles is currently coffee stained, because I keep coffee in the one, and I keep water in the other, and then I'll swap out the tail one for my coffee. But yes, caffeine is going to be essential. Other than that, supplement wise, the only supplement I do take, which I actually only recently started taking, is the ashwagandha. If I'm saying that correctly. It was recommended to me about 3 months ago. I'm not really a huge supplement guy, not that I'm opposed to. I feel like I'm not well versed enough, and it's just and I kind of like, things and things like that, so. I kind of lean more toward natural nutrition with that, but I'm definitely not opposed to it.
Right, let's see, this is always fun to get physiology versus nutrition on how we use supplements. So Jamie, Alexandra, Tom, what do you think about supplements? Do you see a place for them? What might you recommend? And then we'll let Jessica handle it from there, and then you can have to break dance off.
Jamie can go first. Maybe.
I was going to say ladies first, but if you insist, I mean, I will start off by saying, first of all, if you use caffeine already, like me, like, yeah, now is not the time to give that up. I would also say that, I mean, as far as most supplements go, here's my old guy answer, is that the large majority of supplements don't work, but caffeine is not one of them. Caffeine does work, and it absolutely has a role in exercise performance. I think the interesting thing here, though, is just the duration for which you're going to be exercising. And to think that you're going to be jacked up on caffeine for 7 days straight at all times, that you would be very uncomfortable if you attempted to do that. So it kind of comes back to the same thing we've heard a few times, right? You're going to have to practice this and use it strategically. I think my advice would probably be, think about when you're going to need it the most. There's sort of a rule in racing that once you start using caffeine, for shorter races, you don't stop. But I think in this case, you may want to use it strategically, in the middle of the day or the end of the day, or whatever you think is going to work best for you. And maybe I'll hand it off to Alex with that.
Yeah. So I was thinking, yeah, there's nothing else that I would recommend for your distance in terms of a supplement for performance. I think that sodium in your bottles is going to be important, and I don't think that, Jessica can probably comment on this, but I don't think there's a lot of evidence that sodium tablets are the way to go. But sodium in electrolytes in your bottle is going to be important to avoid hyponatremia, and especially with the long distance events. Like some events, it's like 50% of participants cross the line with hyponatremia. So it's like, and that's when you have diluted salt in your blood, and it can either be from drinking too much water, plain water, or it can be from just losing too much salt over the course of the day. So that's going to be important. And I think, yeah, I'm not a hydration specialist, but Jessica can probably talk about that. But I would say that would be an area to really focus in on. And then the only other thing in the kind of supplement realm is a lot of athletes take NSAIDs or like anti-inflammatory drugs, primarily to avoid pain. And I would say that's not a good idea. There's quite a lot of evidence that it can damage your kidneys, can damage your gut. It can kind of lead to some of this like passing out essentially because of just kind of systemic inflammation and from the gut permeability. So stay away from your Advil and your painkillers in that respect. And I'd say just embrace the pain. It's going to hurt, and kind of that's what you signed up for.
Yeah, I'll jump in. I know in the ultra endurance community that I have worked in locally, there was talk around taking vitamin I for ibuprofen. And that just seemed like sort of a given that everyone was taking it. And I was like, well, I don't think you need to take it all the time. And it's not really like, not something that you should do. But I definitely agree with what everyone said. If you're drinking coffee and that's part of your normal routine, there's no reason why you should stop doing that. My only comment around coffee specifically is that I wouldn't want coffee intake to displace intake of an electrolyte containing drink, kind of like Alexandra was saying. So balancing out, how much coffee you're consuming with some kind of a sports drink, just to make sure that you're getting the sodium and the other electrolytes that you need. Obviously, there's other ways to get caffeine, and now there are some like sport food products that contain caffeine and sometimes these sport drinks that contain caffeine. So it doesn't always come down to coffee, but I would say there's no reason not to continue with coffee or caffeine like you've been doing. I don't know that you need to look for an actual like pill or supplement that provides you with extra caffeine. It seems like the amount you're using now is probably still going to be appropriate. Certainly there may be times, especially when you get ready for that afternoon marathon round 2, where you may want a little pick me up. And so that might be different than what you do normally, but I don't think you need to go out of your way to up your caffeine intake, and definitely not take, like, I don't think a pre-workout with caffeine is appropriate just because you're going to be getting enough of a boost from what you're normally consuming. And aside from that, in just general supplement world, I feel like, you know, hopefully you're meeting most of your needs through diet alone. In the ultra endurance community, I know there's talk around potentially having these like temporary suppressions in immune function following a really high intense event. And so having antioxidants like vitamin C in your system can be protective, but that can easily be done by just consuming foods that contain vitamin C. And I know you did a 24-hour recall for us on your diet, and you were really good on fruit intake. So I would say as long as you're maintaining a good fruit intake, you'll be getting the vitamin C you need from diet. And I don't think you need to worry about taking it in some other supplemental form. So, you know, maybe having said that though, you didn't eat enough vegetables. So maybe finding some vegetables you like too, because that's another good source of vitamin C and a lot of other vitamins and minerals. But in general, I would say the only other supplements that I think might be beneficial, and this is more just in sort of a general sense for endurance athletes and just sort of potential anti-inflammatory benefits, would be tart cherry juice, which I guess is more of a food than a supplement, but there's, you know, some good research just around how that can help with recovery. And it actually, tart cherries are a natural source of melatonin. It can help with sleep as well. And so the thinking there is that you'd want to consume 12 ounces 1 or 2 times a day. Usually it's not tied to exercise. So you might have some in the morning and some at night, and then it helps with both recovery and sleep. And the other thing that you may want to consider taking as an actual supplement is omega-3 fish oil. Because we're just generally not great at getting consistent omega-3 forms that come from fish oil, the EPA and the DHA, in our diet on a daily basis. So a supplement's the best way to kind of ensure that. And omega-3s have a fair amount of purported benefits. I think we're still sort of debating about exactly how they benefit all of us consistently, but it seems like when you do a risk-benefit analysis, the potential benefits certainly outweigh any major risks related to taking omega-3s, and you can definitely do it in sort of a small, low dose kind of way. So those would be my only real supplement suggestions. And then in general, for endurance athletes, we're usually just wanting to make sure that iron status is okay. That's definitely more of a concern for female endurance athletes than male endurance athletes, but it would probably just be something worth kind of checking periodically through your training to make sure your iron levels are good. And assuming that that's fine, and I think you're eating enough protein, so I don't know that that's going to be a concern, then you're good. Otherwise, if iron looks like it's a little low, then maybe an iron supplement would be appropriate in sort of a short-term use period. So those are my thoughts around supplements.
I was just gonna say that in regards to coffee being a gas from the afternoon, I had a Red Bull on my way here this evening. So caffeine is just, you know, all of it. So that won't change anything.
All right, well, it's just a little after 8 o'clock here. So I think being mindful of everyone's time, I'd like to thank our panelists for being with us this evening and for sharing your thoughts and your wisdom. With our friends joining at home, thanks for joining us. We'll hang around for a bit. We'll stay on, and Marty's got.
Yeah, before everybody leaves, Kevin did mention earlier about inviting people to come along with me, or maybe I think Jeff did, I'm not sure. But for those that are interested, we are doing a virtual challenge with this between May 15th and August 21st. Proceeds go to benefit Buffalo Bowling Corps. And you can run, walk, or hike either half the distance of the canal or the full canal, interactive map online with that. And throughout the entire event, I'm doing what I'm calling my training runs, where I'm getting groups of people together, go run local parts of the canal throughout the state. And then I'm actually testing out this weekend. I think I finally found the live tracking feature for myself. So when I'm running in August, every participant will be able to see where I'm at along the canal and whether they have day off work or they want to take a lunch break or, just happen to be running through their backyard, which is actually happening for a couple of folks I know. They can come out and join me on the canal for however long they want while I'm trudging along. So you go to www.pitcanal.com for any information on that. And yeah, the event starts in a couple of weeks. So I'm really looking forward to it. We're doing our first training run in Lockport, New York on May 15th. So can't wait.
So final words from the panelists and final thoughts, takeaways.
Thanks for having me. This has been really fun. Nice to hear the different perspectives too.
Yeah, I will echo that. Thank you very much for having us. And Marty, I'm glad it's you, not me. But good luck with the training between now and then. And we're certainly happy to talk anytime if there's something that we can do to help.
Yeah, absolutely echo those thoughts. Marty, if you need anything, want to talk obviously on the psychological side of that, and maybe some preparation things specifically tailored for you, and happy to talk with you at any time.
And I'll just echo that I'm available to talk more about nutrition, but I'm really just curious and excited to kind of see how things go, both in your training and for the event itself. So I'll definitely be following your progress.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin, and good luck, Marty.
I'll be in touch soon with everyone because, as you're aware, to students at home, we've been chatting about this. We're hoping to hook Marty up to some gadgets as well, so that in addition to the GPS, so you can follow where he is as he's running. We're going to try to broadcast some of his physiology live, things like respiration rate, heart rate variability, so that we'll, still working out the details there, but stay tuned. And Jamie Alexander, I'll be reaching out for some help there for some thoughts around what we can hook them up to and what we can be monitoring to help them not only with performance but safety as well.
And thank you, everybody. I got a lot of information from you guys. Definitely probably are asking you all at some point. So I really appreciate it because this is gonna be fun. So thank you.
That's all we got. Well, we can hang around. I can bring up all the faces now. Let's bring up all the faces. Why not? On the big screen here. And we got Tomas, how's it going? Now that we can see you up there. We had the small view here. And let's see, I'm still the camera is I'll just come to this. Yeah, thanks again. Thanks again, everyone, for coming by. We really appreciate it.
Jessica, it's funny, that's the exact reason why I'm at SU tonight, because my 5-year-old daughter, anytime she sees me on a Zoom call ever, climbs literally on top of my head. So tonight before I left, she made sure to climb on top of my head and sit there.
Their movie just ended, so I think to go.
Perfect timing, Jessica.
There we go.
I was just gonna say my daughter wants to run along the canal with me a little bit too, so she likes the nuts. That's the only reason she races. So.
Thanks again, guys. And Jeff, it was a pleasure to meet you. Marty, good luck with the training till we speak again.
Great. Yep. Good luck, everybody. Nice talking with you.
And the recording.